What you have to understand is that there's always a time constraint. And what happens is that these people start doing something for a hobby while also maintaining some kind of job, whatever it might be. I mean, a lot of content creators will turn to YouTube to escape whatever kind of minimum wage, um, kind of tedious job that they have. I mean, look at Sargon, for instance. This is a man who would be the assistant manager of JD Sport if it weren't for YouTube. And what they do is they turn to YouTube as an outlet, they turn to YouTube as an escape, they turn to YouTube as a hobby. But because it eats up so much of their time, eventually they have to monetize that free time in order to substitute for the income that they've lost from, say, working part time or not doing other things. But as people will always say, do the thing that you love. You know, when children are growing up, you say you work in education, Godwinson. I don't know what exactly that means, whether you're an NQT or whether you're a janitor, perhaps, at a school. I don't know. Whatever it might be, you're working in education. And, you know, you must be aware of people telling kids, this is if you're being genuine and not just pulling my chain here, that people will say, you can achieve anything, believe in yourself, do what you love. But the problem is if you try to do something that you love, you have to financialize, you have to monetize your hobby. So I don't think this is a problem with the integrity of particular YouTubers. This is something that is more generalized. This is a problem that people have when they say love painting or they love creating. And people tell them, well, you love creating, you love painting, why don't you make that your job? And as soon as they make it their job, they hate it. Because when you financialize your hobbies, when you monetize your hobbies, you enter into a system of relations in which you become alienated. And when you do videos on the depression and the absurdity and the alienation of these content creators, you have to contextualize that within wider alienation, that it's not a unique case. The fact that a content creator um, tries to upgrade themselves superficially with fake teeth, etc., etc., is not like Boogie is not something that is restricted to content creators. This is something that is now a multi-billion-dollar industry, cosmetic surgery. It's something that BBC and ITV presenters have to do in order to keep their jobs. You know, if you're Susanna Reid or if you're Laura Koonsberg, you have to get your Botox and you have to make yourself look nice for the cameras. And it's not something that is just a question of individual authenticity, because when you enter into that hobby and your hobby starts to take up so much time that you have to monetize it in order to substitute the income that you've lost, then you have to then play by the rules of that system of production. You know, you have to enter into the rules of capitalism, and that necessarily means alienation. So I think when you're posing this question of why are so many people monetizing their hobby on YouTube, it's not because they are lacking integrity or they've sold out. It's that it's inevitable that this kind of behavior will occur because there's no other way of substituting your income if you're taking up a hobby. I mean, if you're like Montaigne, okay, and you can live a life of learned luxury, if you're, you know, if you inherit old money and you don't need to work, you can live as this kind of amateur philosopher or whatever. And this is what a lot of YouTubers want to do. People like Sargon and V and all the others. They like to pretend that they are just minor aristocrats in the 18th century, that landlords don't have to work because they're getting their rents from all their lands, and that they can devote their time to intellectual pursuits, etc., etc. When, of course, we understand that these people are turning their hobby into a job because of this restriction of time, and this is ultimately what it was down to. I mean, the whole point of surplus labour and exploitation is not about necessarily exploiting wages and money value. You know, it's not enough to say, for instance, that somebody working at a company is having their surplus labour exploited and so they need a higher wage to compensate. It's about exploited time as opposed to exploited money. And that's exactly what's happening to these people, is that they are having to devote time to content creation, and they might start off creating just as a hobby now and again, maybe an hour or so a week. But as they become more invested in their hobby, they become popular. But that popularity then fuels their confidence to produce more. But there's a constraint on time. And so as they take more time to produce the videos, they need to then work fewer hours. And in working fewer hours, they need to then make up the income that's lost from not working through their hobby. And so their hobby becomes monetized, and it becomes a financial instrument, essentially. And that's the problem, is that as soon as you turn your hobby into a financial instrument, you then take on all of the alienation and all of the exploitation that comes with that, particularly the alienation, which is why you have this YouTuber or content creator burnout, as they like to call it, because it's the same as working in a sales job. You know, if you work in recruitment or you work in sales, you're basically earning a commission. You might get a flat salary, but basically you earn whatever sales you bring to the company, and it's the same in YouTube. So what they're doing is they're turning their hobby, which is supposed to be an escape from the capitalist mode of production, the system of production, right? That what they're doing is they're saying, okay, I hate this wage slavery, working as Sargon would, a manager at JD Sport or an assistant manager at Sainsbury's or something. And they're saying, okay, I want to get away from that and do something that can be fulfilling and creative and non-financialized. But the more they do it and the more time they have to devote to it, the more the necessity to monetize impinges upon their work and their life. And then as soon as they monetize it, well, of course, they just go straight back into that thing that they were attempting to escape in the first place. And so when your escapism becomes just as alienating as the thing that you were escaping, then necessarily the only outlet is burnout, freak out, suicide, you know, shutting down your YouTube channel and just, you know, trying to get away from everything. And that's what happens. So I don't think when Jim is trying to monetize his brand, which is what it is, effectively, and you can see he's very coy. I mean, this is one thing I will defend Sargon on, is that after all of that alt-right Richard Spencer thing, Sargon did have Jim on a live stream, and Jim basically agreed with everything Sargon believed. But he couldn't say that he agreed with Sargon because he was trying to use him as this kind of lolcow fodder in order to retain the continuity of his brand, which is a kind of, you know, chaotic, neutral, everybody can fuck off. It's a kind of like extreme, edgy, radical centrism where, you know, I hate all the people that are fascists because they're ridiculous, and I hate all the people that are liberals, and I hate it. It's a sort of absurd position that can only be sustained by an extremely aggressive form of mockery of all of your opponents, or an ironic distance, which is again something that you have, Godwinson, when you have somebody on, you do an interview with them or something, you kind of have an Andrew Neil, David Frost type approach where you act very accommodating and very polite in order to draw them in and expose themselves, so that you can then put that killer question in to expose them or embarrass them. But the problem is with that is that you can see that you're on an ironic, you have this ironic shield, this ironic distance, because you're not willing to commit your full ideas. And even part of that, that's part of your brand and the retention of your brand. So, and even like destroying all your channels every couple of months and rebuilding them again. I don't know if that's the product of a kind of embarrassment or a sense of regret and awkwardness. It does seem to be that you fear that you will become one of them, if you like. But again, it's not about having a following or having a brand that makes you become one of them. It's about your substitution of time. Like if you work in education, and I'm taking this at face value, okay? If you have a decent salary, your partner works, I remember you mentioning in a video you had a girlfriend or something. If you're both working and you've got some money, you can spend a couple of hours a week making YouTube videos. You're not going to become like them, Godwinson. You're not going to become like them. It's only if you start really substituting your working time for your hobby that the necessity of life under modern capitalist society, where you have to go out and work in order to get the money, to get the food and pay the mortgage and do this, that you have to monetize your hobby. And as you correctly identify, monetizing your hobby means following the logic of capitalism and not following the logic of creativity. You're not producing things because they need to be produced or because you want them to be produced. You're producing content based upon profitability. So rather than having a creation based upon a need or based upon personal fulfillment, based upon creating it because it needs to be created or because you want it to be, you're producing content based upon its return. It becomes commodified. These videos become no different to a network cable television program, right? So that's the ultimate problem. Jim's fallen into it, as you say. Lots of other people have fallen into it. It's not so much a reflection on their integrity. You have to hate the game and not the gamer, Don't hate the gamer for playing the game. That's just the way things are, unfortunately. And if you don't like it, you should criticize capitalism more, which you don't do. I know you were there in 2013-14 on Britpol. I remember. I was there too. On the threads, on the board. I remember you. I remember all that classic EU election, 2014, Emo Kitty, TTPW. I remember that guy, that medical student who mentioned about Jahan's illness. Now, I was there for all of it, but, I've changed my politics and I'm not anywhere near the right anymore. And I feel like you have a sense, and it feels like to me, in a sense, that you've moved away from that, from your experiences of life, of growing up, but you still harbour some kind of bigoted, kind of racist views, but ultimately it seems the core of what you're criticising, whether you're aware of it or not, is capitalism. What you're saying when you're criticising these content creators is that, when creativity is monetized under capitalism, it becomes inauthentic and the content creators become alienated. And in so many videos, so many hours of content, you're groping towards this point that you have this YouTuber burnout, you have this inauthenticity, you have people substituting their physical appearance with these cosmetic procedures in order to become more ideal or to become more productive, right? I mean, this is a point Mark Fisher makes. I don't want to be that guy, but this is something perhaps you'd agree with, that we don't put an emphasis in our country on spiritual or cultural health, that we don't chastise people or encourage people to experience great art and great culture. You know, that somebody could spend hours of their life devoted to studying literature or studying music or brewing wine or brewing beer or whatever. But we do devote a lot of time to encouraging, and companies as well, will devote a lot of time to encouraging workers to become more healthy. And a lot of the health fad that we have is about becoming more productive. And in YouTuber world, substituting your ugly teeth for brand new teeth, losing weight, becoming more conventional, changing changing your personality, all of these modifications, psychological and physiological, are there to make yourself more productive. But that necessity to become more productive wouldn't exist if we simply had a society based upon need and based upon freedom and the ability to actualize yourself in the way you want to. But because all professions, all jobs, all actions even have to have some kind of utility, I think, okay, you're a reactionary, you might be listening to this and thinking, oh, this is ridiculous. Take someone like Evola, for instance. If you read Meditations on the Peaks, he says that the bourgeois looks at mountain climbing and says, why would you climb a mountain? It's dangerous, there's no profit, there's no utility out of doing it, it's a pointless action, it's completely pointless. You're exposing yourself to danger when you're not actually getting any tangible material reward out of it. But the reward is the act, right? The reward for someone like Evola would be a spiritual reward. For me, it would be a kind of just a personal goal achievement thing, which I think is innate in humans. But if you have a society that's based upon these capitalist material relations, then necessarily every hobby, every act even, is going to be evaluated in terms of a profit and loss calculation. And so you can't really chastise these people so much for being inauthentic, because what you're doing is the classic liberal delusion of blaming individuals instead of blaming systems. And you have to think about this in a systematic way and not in a particular way. Because, what liberals will say is, it's Pride Month, okay? And what liberals will say is, if only the CEO of Raytheon, and Halliburton were lesbian Muslims, then all of the problems and contradictions of our society would just dissolve, If only we didn't have straight white men as CEOs of Goldman Sachs, right? Or if you're a bit more woke, liberal, you might say, if only we didn't have Jews at the head of Goldman Sachs, depending on what you believe. But if you simply just change the composition of the individuals in these particular roles of power, then suddenly all these contradictions will resolve themselves. All of this alienation will end. If only you had authentic creators, if only you had authentic content creators, then none of this alienation would happen. If only you had authentic politicians, like Nigel Farage, as people will say, if only you had authentic bankers, if only you had authentic CEOs of arms dealing companies, then all these problems would cease to exist. But it's not a question of the authenticity of the individuals that are acting as the avatars of these institutions. It's the institutions themselves. You should be criticizing YouTube. You should be criticizing more generally capitalism, not these individual characters that have started off with very good intentions, but have become coerced into following the logic of the system that they are existing within. And this is why I think you always delete your videos and your channel, because you're terrified that you'll become like that. And you understand, I think, implicitly that even though you're an authentic person and an authentic creator, you will still be sucked into and abused by this relation. It doesn't matter how authentic you are. You will become inauthentic necessarily based upon the conditions of the thing that you're engaging with as a content creator or as somebody that works. And so that's the point I really wanted to make. I'm not really criticizing your observations. I think your observations are right. I just think that your justification for your criticism of them is wrong. I don't think it's a question of the individual authenticity. It's a question of analyzing the systems and criticizing the systems, not the people.